We'll begin this presentation with a recapitulation of just a few of the points mentioned by the previous panelists. And that is the notion between the difference between ethics and morality. So ethics is a set of moral principles concerning what is good for human beings and what is good for humanity. And as we know, there's all sorts of ethical systems, and we can have an environmental ethic, we can have a medical ethic, we can have educational ethics, we can have research ethics, and we can have ethics in the various religious systems. But the idea is a set of moral principles. So when we say moral, what we're referring here is to the judgment of what is good and right as a basis for thought and action, as distinguished between what is immoral or bad or wrong. And of course, there are many aspects of life which are amoral. In other words, an action can be taken irrespective of the good or right or bad or wrongness of the action. So morality is based on what is good and right. And so when we think about it, a human being innately is a moral being and cannot escape from that responsibility or duty because they are inherently endowed with the capacity for free will and reason. And it's the presence of those capacities which forces us, whether we like it or not, to figure out and to make choices what is right or wrong or good or bad for us to do. And the interesting thing is, as was brought out, is human beings do not necessarily share any definite, absolute ideal of what is moral, good, and right. Nevertheless, their notions of what is good or evil, right or wrong, even though they're relative and subject to change, do have certain things in common. And so what is the common basis that all moral beings share, regardless of their moral system? And that is, there is an underlying motive, a reason, a desire. And that's because we are basically thinking beings who not only feel, but those feelings influence and are guided by our reason. And so this all comes under the category of motive. And so whereas the motives may differ and very subtly in different ways, the reasons we do based on our understanding and knowledge, motive underlies every ethical system, every moral system. Also, there is an object or an aim or an end in view. So we not only have a motive, but we have an aim, an object, an end in view. And because of that, the third underlying basis of all systems is they have a means or a method or a practice or a path, if you will, to get to that aim, to get to that object. So whenever you're looking at your system or any other system of ethics, this is what you want to examine. What is the underlying motive, the reason, the desire? What is the aim in view? And what is the means or practice by which we tend to accommodate it? So our talk this morning then is a higher ethic of spiritual evolution. And so the question is, well, if ethics are good or bad, what does it mean to have a higher or lower ethic? So we would say there's a few reasons we use the term higher. In this sense, we're talking about a set of principles or a basis of thought and action concerning what is good and right for human beings as immortal spiritual souls, divine in essence and potential, evolving spiritually throughout a long series of incarnations in temporary bodies and personalities. So this automatically and from the start raises the motive, the goal, the methods in light of that higher application, not only to what is good for the human being as we find the human being or society, but what is good for that human being as an immortal, essentially divine soul existing over many lives in many personalities, different personalities. The second idea relating to ethical use of or higher ethics of spiritual evolution is the idea of the application of the higher faculties of thought and action and perception of the immortal soul as compared to the exercise of the lower faculties of the body, brain, physical senses, and pure intellect. So we can have ethical systems based on how we should take care of the body, or how we should act in a business group or in a classroom, or how we should eat, or what we should say. But these all have to do with the faculties of our body or our brain or our senses or our intellect, pure reasoning intellect. And so here we're speaking of a higher ethical system that refers to our higher capacities as soul beings. So we're talking about the application of faculties that have to do more with intuition, compassion, aspiration, the perception of truth, what is enduring and real as opposed to what is temporary. So when we bring in all these higher faculties, our understanding, our motive, our method is raised to a higher level of ethical concern than it would be if we're exercising them in a lower way. And thirdly, we speak of a higher ethical of spiritual evolution because the principles involved are based on universal, self-evident spiritual truths that do not vary across time, place, and condition. And so the difference here is we can have lower, very good ethical systems, but they vary according to the age, the civilization, the group of people, and their ability to express and apply those ideas, as opposed to universal, timeless truths that are self-evident, that can be perceived through the exercise of our naturally endowed faculties of reason, of perception, of understanding, of discernment. The higher ethic of spiritual evolution then shares one common object. We spoke about the motivation, we spoke about object, and there is a common object to all higher ethic of spiritual evolution. Because remember, we spoke of spiritual evolution having to do with the evolution of soul over many lives. And so the evolution here, the object is the acquirement of self-conscious realization of the ultimate state of spiritual being, the ultimate state of wisdom, and the ultimate state of bliss. That would be the goal for the higher ethic. And in different cultures, it has different names for this state. It might be called nirvana or godhood or illumination, but it refers to that one goal. The path to that realization becomes twofold, or we might say the methods become twofold depending on the motivation we have. And as we said, there are two general systems, the doctrine of the eye and the doctrine of the heart. And as was mentioned in the previous presentation, the goal is the same. The self-conscious realization of that ultimate state of bliss, knowledge, and being. The goal is the same. The motive differs though. The one is called the path of liberation because the ultimate reason for aiming that is liberation or freedom from ignorance, from misery, suffering, and from delusion. And it's a personal, individual salvation that is sought. And therefore, the method of obtaining it is different. And it can be, so it requires effort. It requires a high ethical standard. And the goal is the same, but the motive varies. And therefore, the results vary as well. So we're now going to focus then more for the remainder of this presentation on the heart doctrine and the path of renunciation. So to begin with, we want to emphasize that it shares with the eye doctrine or the path of liberation the same goal, the acquirement of self-conscious union, self-conscious knowledge of the ultimate wisdom, the ultimate bliss, and the ultimate being. The difference, the subtle difference, is the motivation. And this is why it's called the path of renunciation, because the motive or the reason we're doing these things is a renunciation of self-interest or desire for personal reward, and a renunciation of that ultimate state or condition in order to remain in the world to help the spiritual progress of souls who are still under the influence of illusion, ignorance, and suffering. So it is a bliss that is obtained, but it is a bliss which is deferred and renounced for the benefit of those who have not been able to reach that state. So we might say the goal is not individual salvation, but the salvation of all. And as a doctrine, it's not exclusive to any one system of religion, but it can underlie all those systems because it is based on the human nature and not on any external temporary reality of religion or civilization. So the method then also differs because it is not a doctrine of the eye. It is not a doctrine of the crowd. It is not one that can be identified and said, oh, this person is an ethical religious person because they practice certain rituals or do certain charities that we can all see, and therefore know that they are on a high ethical path. It is sometimes called, this path of renunciation, the secret path, because progress is made internally and is very much under the awareness of the individual, but is not apparent to the crowd. It is something that one goes through that is not obvious to others, but is clearly known to oneself. So it is an inner path of an ever increasing realization of the soul, of the steps necessary to elevate and purify the thought, the feeling, and the perception. This was summarized in the previous talk as Raj Yoga, which is the discipline and purification of the thought, feeling, and perception of the mind, of the soul. And the necessary steps here are called virtues, not outer practices that we can identify, but inner capacities and powers of the soul that are necessary to overcome the obstacles and elevate the mind and the heart. And once again, the practice of these inner virtues is not obvious to the crowd. It's secret, and yet it is very necessary to this path of renunciation. So even though it cannot be found in books per se, it's not something you can look up in a manual. Like in the Vedas, there are whole sections of the Vedas that have to do with practices, or in the Bible, certain areas of the Old Testament, the New Testament that have to do with certain practices. And yet its stages are given out as signposts, as guidelines, so that one can test, check, and verify, because this is a path that if others have taken and have said, you will know that you're on the path, that you're not lost, when you recognize certain things in yourself. And we are clearly given these guidelines. And we're just going to mention them briefly because we still have plenty of time for discussion. One is to act at all times for the benefit of others, primarily as souls like ourselves in evolution. And secondly, while doing that, to renounce any personal self-interest in reward for those actions, even when we know that karmically such actions will not only benefit them, but benefit ourselves as well. So even though we know that right action has a right effect, we do not concern ourselves with that, but primarily with the benefit we can do to others. Thirdly, it is better to act to help others than to refrain from help of others outside because of personal fear. In other words, if you refrain from helping others because you're afraid that you may not know what to do, or whether you're going to harm them, or whether you're going to harm yourself, it is better out of courage and desire to be of help, to have that motive, than to refrain from helping others. In other words, as Krishna says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, in all cases, act as seemeth best unto thee. And you will learn in time what it is, but you cannot refrain out of fear of action. Perform the duties of life that you find under karma. You do not have to run to any monastery. You do not have to run to any country. You do not even have to look outside your own neighborhood. You will find in the duties that you perform in your everyday life plenty of opportunity to pursue this inner path, because it is a secret, an inner path, and does not require any particular place to worship or to apply it. Perform what is due to others, not just those who seemingly need your help, but those who may, our family, our friends, and most particularly our enemies. What is due to them as well, those who would oppose to us. And to perform what is due to others without personal regard, or rather being indifferent to whether it is painful or pleasurable for us. There's lots of times we like to do things because they are easy for us. They are pleasurable. We like helping others who acknowledge our help and give us thanks and praise and seem open. But how about the person who how about the tasks that require some effort, that are difficult for us, or might potentially cause some flack? Are we willing to do what is due to others and indifferent to how it may affect us personally? That does not mean we disregard how it may affect them, but our disregard of any way it may affect us personally. And so all this is sort of summarized in our declaration, with the idea is to make ourselves better able or more fit to help and teach others. That's a good way of thinking. So at the end of the voice of the silence, when these two paths are laid out, the goal's the same: bliss immediate or bliss deferred. That's the subtle difference. And why would we defer that ultimate bliss? Out of boundless pity and compassion for the world of mortals. And it says the moral choice and of the ethical path is yours. And as a moral thinking being, only you can make it. The only thing a teacher can do is point out the way and the pitfalls, but ultimately, in our everyday lives and over time, the choice and the practice is ours.